There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Football Focus Fantasy Slant, obviously powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings. A little different format this time. I am your usual co-host, Michael Moore. Our other usual co-host, Scott Spratt, has passed on the reins to Mr. Russell Clay. Say hello, Russell.
How's it going, fellas? I'm honored to take the reins.
There you go. It's some big shoes to fill, Russ. I'm not gonna lie. And if any Panther mention, we need to give a shout out to Scott. So, but me and Russell are going to be your sort of dynasty-centric podcast hosts, at least until the beginning of the season. So we'll do mock drafts, look at different tiers, look at the startup strategy, all sorts of good stuff. So without further ado, I think first. Russell, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into Dynasty and how you made it to PFF?
Well, I think simply where the origins came from, much like a lot of people, is Madden, playing a lot of Madden as a child and into your teens, late teens, and then just playing that franchise so much. Me and my buddies were really big into it, and then one day, one of my buddies just said, "Hey, I found out about this Dynasty sort of format, fantasy football," and I just looked over the rules and the settings, and I was like, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So that was around 2008 or 2009, and I just jumped in. I was only in a league or two for the first few years, and then it's just slowly and steadily grown since then. I've sort of started, within the last 5 years or so, started writing, hopping around different sites, and finally made my way to Pro Football Focus. So happy to be here, and hopefully I can provide some knowledge for you guys.
And just so you know, people will hold it against you if you recommend some player or some strategy that goes horribly wrong. So just be prepared for your Twitter mentions to blow up.
So thankfully, they weren't there. They weren't around last year when I was talking about Trent Richardson.
Right. Yeah, no, it's like a tree in the woods. Nobody was around to do that, so it didn't happen.
Exactly.
Well, good. Well, it's good to have you, Russ. And like I said, you and I are sort of the Dynasty, I won't say experts. That's probably going a little too far. But we will bring everyone their Dynasty content. So I think a little later we'll get into sort of startup strategy for maybe those of you new to the Dynasty format or just starting out. But you know, what I'd like to do each week, which, by the way, we will be here with a Dynasty-centric podcast each week at Pro Football Focus, is just touch on some of the, news and notes from the day or the week and sort of just talk a little bit about the Dynasty impact on that. So, Russell, I know we had touched on a little bit of Todd Gurley. The news is he, by all accounts, looks good. He looks healthy. And he might be ready to start from the get-go. So as far as Dynasty implications, I mean, obviously for redraft, that's fairly significant. But for Dynasty, what does that do to his standing there?
In terms of long-term value, I don't think this changes your outlook at all. And if it had before, you're off the hook, because if you were changing your sort of Dynasty ranks based on one major injury, I don't necessarily think that was a good idea. But for this year one, it does change the dynamic of some of your teams, because if you're getting solid production from him from week one, or maybe they bring him out of the gate slow, but say by week 3 or 4, if you're getting what we expect Todd Gurley to produce, like, you might have a better shot at the playoffs this year. So while your opinion may not have changed of him, I think you're looking at maybe a better chance at the playoffs if you do own him now.
Yeah, and that's going to be something I know we touch on a lot later when it comes to startup strategy, is sort of that, do you plan for now or do you plan for later? So, but yeah, I agree. I mean, look, as far as Dynasty goes, the injury for Gurley, or at least the recovery, didn't have a real big impact. I mean, if you were taking him 1 overall, hopefully you were still taking him 1 overall.
Right.
And I know a lot of Dynasty formats have taxi squads, meaning those guys that you can sort of stash and keep on your roster outside the normal roster limit. So, look, worst case scenario is you draft them and stash them there and see what happens. So, Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a real big effect. So the other sort of blurb that we saw come through the pipeline that you and I touched on was T.Y. Hilton possibly, or at least getting close maybe to signing a extension with the Colts. Now, just to give you a little bit, Russ, of where I'm coming from with Hilton, the second they drafted Philip Dorsett, I was completely off that bandwagon.
Right.
You know, because I just thought, oh, hey, here's another undersized, quick guy off the line that is a perfect replacement for T.Y. Hilton in a year or two. And look, I couldn't blame the Colts if that's the way they went. I mean, they took Dorsett in the first round when, admittedly, they have a bunch of holes. So, but if they do end up re-signing him, you know, cap implications aside, because that's not what Dynasty's about, but, you know, what does that do for T.Y.'s value if he stays? And I think more importantly, what does that do to Philip Dorsett's value going forward?
This could really muddy the waters for both Philip Dorsett and Dante Moncrief. I know a lot of people were buying Moncrief very high early in the offseason, and then once Philip Dorsett got drafted, that kind of shifted things away from Moncrief. But I think everyone's assumption once they picked Dorsett was, okay, they're moving on from Hilton. They're going to run it with the future being Moncrief, Dorsett, maybe one of those tight ends they re-sign, and then Andre for a few years. But if this happens, this is gonna change a lot from my view of Dorsett, because I just don't know how many targets he's going to be able to get in that offense, you know?
Yeah, that's the big concern, because before this news, and even if Ty doesn't resign, I'm very big on the Dorsett bandwagon. I think he can slot in there perfectly, and I'm not going to go as far to say he can replicate exactly what Ty's done, but I think he can come pretty close. And look, Andre Johnson, like you said, is good for a few more years tops. The tight ends they got, I don't see it. I don't know what your opinion is, but it seems like Dwayne Allen is best suited to block, and Colby Fleener is just best suited for the bench. So,
it's with their skill position players, it's been interesting. I don't necessarily think they're that great, but the Colts have shown they're pretty stubborn with how they deal with them. Like when you look at the Trent Richardson fiasco, they really they just tried to keep throwing him out there even though it wasn't working. So,
right.
And I know Luck has a pretty good rapport with Fleener, even though Fleener isn't that great of a player. So it'll be a lot of the contract stuff we're talking about really depends on what we think of these guys going forward.
Yeah, and again, we'll touch on it a little later, but I'm real big into situations and opportunity. I mean, I will admit I am not one of those fantasy players that can look at tape and tell you who's going to be a stud. I mean, look, it doesn't take a genius to see Mike Evans is probably a stud. As far as finding those diamonds in the rough, I leave that to other guys. But look, I'm going to take advantage of a good situation, at least offensively. So, I think the Ty thing is a very interesting thing to watch, especially for rookie drafts. And I think you just pray that your rookie draft is a little later, and that gives them more time to either re-sign Ty or not re-sign Ty. So,
right.
Well, good. Yeah. So that covers a little bit of what's happening this week. But let's get into some dynasty startup stuff, Russ. And like I said, for those of you maybe just starting out, or those of you that are still new to the process and maybe looking to join some other leagues. We'll touch on sort of, what the mentality could be or should be, the different stages of the draft. And look, there is no one right answer. I don't think there ever is, but we're here to sort of shed some light on what we do in the, I think, 20 dynasty leagues between us. So, Russ, I'll let you kick it off. So, that first pick, obviously it's important for any dynasty startup, but not just the first pick, but the first few rounds. What is your? Well, no, scratch that. Let's go back to the first pick. What is your mentality for that first pick? And I don't think it really matters where in the round you pick. I mean, you're going to get a top 12 player. But what do you look for with that very first pick?
In the first round, I tend to gravitate towards someone who's gonna help me for a long time, and that usually is wide receivers. First rounds or Rob Gronkowski, basically
Right.
those top seven or so receivers right now. I really think we're in like a golden age of wide receiver talent, and I mean, when you look at the guys coming down the line like Mike Evans and Odell Beckham, it just seems to keep getting better. So I don't think any of those guys are regressing. They're all young, so I would love to gravitate towards those guys early on.
Yeah. No, and that's a pretty solid strategy. I mean, like you said, with Dynasty, it's completely different than redraft, meaning you're not going for broke for 1 year. You got to
Right.
plan ahead, and I personally, I think some people go too far. They look 5 or 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
But you're right. You definitely got to look at who can help you over a couple years. So, yeah, with those receivers, yeah, I think if you can get a stud one, that is definitely a pretty good strategy to employ.
I mean, I think the number one thing you mentioned already is being versatile and sort of not getting yourself stuck in one strategy. If something's falling one way and that's leaving value for, say, a running back, I'm not like if I'm going to get Eddie Lacy in the second round or something, I'm not going to deny that value, you know. But
Sure. Oh yeah. No,
yeah,
it's sort of, you know, it's sort of best player available, I think, meaning,
right,
and let's talk about that. So with running backs, especially in Dynasty, they just don't last. They
right,
just don't. I mean,
right.
I had an article just to plug myself for a little bit on Pro Football Focus where, there's a pretty steep drop off in age of running backs, at least of top fantasy running backs after 28. And after that,
Mhm.
I mean, it's just very slim chances that you're going to have a running back turn in a top fantasy performance. So, if you can get a stud running back in his first year or two, I think, that's fine. But, anything in his mid-20s and beyond, I think you're just I don't want to say it's a waste of a pick, depending on where you pick it. But, you got to look at that, meaning that drop-off could come at any time.
Right, and another huge thing is perceived value versus what the player's bringing to your team. So
Right.
sometimes you're going to take that risk on the running back that's aging and say like, obviously he's not a first round pick anymore, but an Arian Foster, like you're not going to get value next year for him if you
Right.
buy him now, but he might be able to help you the next few years, so you kind of just take the value hit. And
Right.
that's again another part of being versatile, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm gonna zig a little bit to your zag, but and I don't know, I couldn't tell you where I first saw this. I mean, you had mentioned you started Dynasty stuff about 2008, that's pretty impressive. I mean, that is a long time ago. I mean, I've only done it for 3 or 4 years, but from the
Right.
get-go, I sort of constructed it kind of like that Madden team you were talking about before, and
Hmm.
if I've got a top pick and maybe the top one or two receivers are gone that I know are top one or two, and again, people are going to laugh and think I'm crazy, but I might go quarterback depending on the quarterback. Meaning,
Okay.
if
Yeah.
it's Rodgers or Luck, I seriously entertain that, which I realize is completely against the norm, but just touching on what you mentioned, which is, hey, you got to look at the guy that's going to give you value for the longest. Look,
Hmm.
quarterback, once you've got a set quarterback on an actual NFL team, I don't want to say he's set for life, but he's pretty close, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And given, I'm not saying, hey, there should be 5 quarterbacks drafted in the first round of a dynasty draft, but as far as a Rodgers and a Luck go, it just I wouldn't take those guys one or two. I would stick with what you had mentioned, maybe a Gronkowski, or a Mike Evans or an Odell Beckham. But if I'm middle
Mhm.
of the first round and those top running or those top receivers and Gronkowski are gone, I think I'm seriously considering a quarterback. Is that crazy, or is that okay?
And it's funny. I'm gonna take us off track for 1 second here, just to bring it back around. I was randomly looking at Joseph Adai today. Don't ask me why, but
I saw that. I was going to bring it up. I was gonna bring it up.
and it brought me to this 2007 sort of fantasy article, and you look at the dynasty rankings from back then. All the positions, wide receiver, tight end, running back, Like all those players are either retired or not what they once were, except for quarterback.
Right.
Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and there was another one up there, and it's like, God, 7 years later, and they're still at the top of their game. So it's like, yeah, no, I totally get that. If you want to take a Rodgers or a Luck in the first round, I'm in on that idea, and I have done that. So
Yeah, well, and again, this is something that our listeners and you will grow to learn. But I'm a fairly conservative dynasty player, meaning I know every league has that one guy who makes like 20 trades before the draft.
yeah.
And if you're that guy, Russell, it's not a lot, but yeah, I like to have my team set, and then if I'm comfortable with it, I just let it play out. So. Getting a quarterback like that, I'm more than okay with. Just a little aside, especially, I don't know if you have ever played a 2-quarterback dynasty league, but
Yes.
especially in those leagues, quarterbacks go pretty quickly too. So you want to be sure to definitely get one in those leagues just to be safe. So
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
yeah. So okay. So after that first round, I mean, I think we can agree best player available, depending on your definition of
Right.
best.
Yeah.
But those first couple rounds are obviously pretty important. So what is your strategy, for rounds, say 2 through, 7 or 8?
So round 2 specifically, in previous years, I had wanted to trade that. So like you were talking about, I'm that guy.
And that's okay. Well,
Yeah,
we'll get to trades a little later.
So I would look to trade that for maybe some picks in the 5 through 7 area and pick up some value there. But man, this year the second round looks stacked. Like if I can get a Todd Gurley or Amari Cooper or Aaron Rodgers, for instance, sometimes he's falling to the second round. If I can get that type of player there, I'm definitely doing that. This is a good year for the top 2 rounds. So
Yeah, there's just a lot of talent, and I'm
yeah.
trying to think back on if it's always been like this. I don't think it has, but
Yeah, I can't remember another time where it was anything close to this before.
right, right. So, and look, I don't think people are complaining. It's just it's more for everyone else. But so let me ask this then: does who you took the first round or two dictate who you take in the immediate rounds after, like 3 and 4? Are you pretty much going best player available, for a certain number of rounds?
Yeah, pretty much how I attack every draft is just BPA, BPA. And then if it gets to round 8 or 9 and I don't have any of a position, then maybe I'll start looking to there. But normally it just kind of works out, Just kind of like that Madden franchise again. Like
right.
you just go through and try to build sort of through the best players you can find. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, another thing I look at is, I'll say look at the positions I don't have filled yet. Right. So let's say I go quarterback, receiver the first 2 rounds.
Right.
On the way back in the 3rd and 4th, I'm probably going to look at running back. Now, I don't necessarily look at BPA, but I'm going to look at the drop off right after a tier or 2. So if I only see 2 or 3 running backs left, good running backs that I'm willing to draft in the 3rd round, I think that will probably push me to make that pick more than, oh hey, there's a really good receiver left, just because that's a long way. No matter where you pick in the round, it's a long way till your next series of picks. So. I think in a dynasty league I did a couple weeks ago, I think I went quarterback, receiver the first 2 rounds, and I think I was picking like 11. So I had quite a ways on the way back. So I looked at the running backs on that 3rd and 4th round, and I think I went the veteran route with like LaShawn McCoy and Marshawn Lynch, which we'll get into a little later on sort of veterans versus rookies. But I think you got to look at that, and you have to plan ahead, meaning if there's only 2 or 3 good guys left at a position, I think you got to snatch those guys up.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a huge part of. I mean, best player available is sort of how I gauge it, but also you have to watch out and stay ahead of the curve on sort of that type of stuff as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Each draft is different.
Yeah, it's
So,
wild variation between
right.
opinions and stuff. So
Right. So okay, so let's well, first of all, let's do I guess the radio version is the station identification program. I do want to let people know they can get a pro football focus, excuse me, gold subscription, $24.99. You can get PFF's dynasty rankings. You can get dynasty content from me and Russ here. There's a lot of good stuff in anticipation of people's upcoming, startup dynasties, rookie drafts, etc. So go ahead and get that. I was a subscriber before I joined the site, and believe me, I can say it works. So that's the plug. So getting back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's say, Russ, that you filled in, say, your starting lineup for the most part, and you're in those middle rounds now, like maybe the early teens. What do you do there? Is it still sort of best player available, or is there certain positions you think have more value later on than others?
I tend to find once I have all the positions secured, or at least what I perceive to be secured, I go hard at running back and wide receiver, just on either players that have underperformed or just yeah, I just hit those two positions really hard. And then, I mean, some tight ends are nice, but I don't usually get too far into the developmental tight ends. I don't normally find that to be too much of a good thing.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about tight ends real quick. So I think it's fair to say it's Rob Gronkowski and everyone else.
Yeah.
Like literally, I think you could make a claim for like 8 to 10 tight ends behind Gronk in their own level that could do just as good as each other. So,
Right.
yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, look, there's a ton more running backs and receivers to snatch up in those middle rounds, and look, those are your lottery tickets. Those are the guys you find
Right.
or are able to find later in startup drafts, especially that could hit. And another thing I'll say about this, and I touched on this a little earlier. That's really the place to get your veterans that maybe people are overlooking. That they don't want to touch them because they're over the cliff or whatever. Which, given they may not be your starter, they may not be your top runner, your top receiver, but they can still provide good value for a year or two. I mean, I didn't look it up ahead of time, but I would love to see like Frank Gore's ADP in dynasty startups.
Especially earlier this offseason, it was so back there, 14th, 15th round,
Right.
because nobody knew where he was going yet, and he's older, so people had given up on him. So yeah, him, Bolden, Colston, players like that can really sort of hold things down for you as lower end running back twos or wide receiver threes, and they can do some damage. I mean, Bolden's been not a league winner, but he's secured some pretty good value the past few years.
He's keeping his job. I mean, and I'm a 49er fan, and believe me, it's been a pleasant surprise after the misfires of Michael Crabtree and others.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I'm real big on, hey, what can you do for me lately, right? Or what will you do for me lately? And guys like Gordon Bolden are the epitomes of that. I mean, look, those guys will still be around in those later rounds. And by all means, get your studs at the other positions. But if you're looking for a running back 2 or wide receiver 3, and you want to be competitive this year, then those are the guys you need to go after.
Quickly, okay, you're a 49ers fan. Vernon Davis, what's your take on his situation? Not into it?
Well, okay, and again, the listeners and you will learn to know this, but I don't want to be like a Debbie Downer for this season for them, but like just overall, I will be
not looking good.
Let's put it this way. I had a buddy of mine, also a 49er fan, go to Vegas, and the over-under on wins is 6.5.
Yeah.
So if it's over that, I will be pleasantly surprised.
So just bad all around.
Yeah, I mean, and let's put it this way. Anyone on the 49ers, I think you can get in those later rounds for sure.
Yeah.
From Kaepernick on down. And even Hyde. I mean, even the news I heard today where they're going committee, or at least it looks like they're going committee, I think will probably drop his value a bit. So, Yeah, it's not good, but that's okay. Hey, you never know. Like you said, Anquan Bolden might carry you this season. Who knows? So,
Right.
well, good. So we covered sort of the first couple rounds and those middle rounds. So later in the draft, Russ, what do you look for? Is it just getting as many lottery tickets as you can? Is it shoring up on those veterans we talked about? What do you do in maybe the round 20s or the late teens?
This was actually my debut article for PFF. I wrote about 5 late round lottery tickets. My methodology that I've sort of figured out over the years is looking at players that have fallen out of favor that were highly drafted. So either fallen out of favor for their teams or with ADP. Just in general, players that you can get for nothing that have some solid draft capital. So drafted in the top 3 rounds. And what I've noticed by looking into this is players like this break out every year. You want to look at last year, Golden Tate, just needed a new team. Mark Ingram, Kobe Fleener. I mean, he was fantasy productive, last year. So
no, he served a purpose. Don't get me wrong.
So this year I'm kind of looking at guys like Aaron Dobson. Not exciting. There's nothing really optimistic to say about him right now, but I think he's one injury away from a solid opportunity, and I don't think NFL teams give up on players as quickly as we do. You know what I mean? So they still spent a second-round pick on him. So if he shows any signs, they're going to want to give him an opportunity. So I look for guys like that rather than the undrafted free agents who are sort of, on the basically the taxi squad of the NFL teams,
Right. Well, no, and that's an excellent point. I mean, if an NFL team used a high pick on a guy, like you said, the chances are a lot lower that they're going to cut bait on him. And even if they did, look, those guys are going to get another chance somewhere. I mean, that's just the nature of the nature of the business. Like you said with Golden Tate, he flourished in Detroit. I mean, I guarantee you, he probably won some leagues out there for somebody. So, I agree with you. I mean, towards those later rounds, for me,
you're just taking. Nobody's a guarantee in that round, so you're just kind of taking shots, Yeah.
And again, it's sort of like I mentioned earlier. That's really where you look at the teams that give players good opportunities. Whether it's any receiver on the Packers or any receiver on the Colts, maybe any receiver this year on the Saints, just because they're going to be behind a lot and chucking it. I mean, those are the rounds you can really pick up on somebody. So. I agree. I think it's all about lottery tickets at that point.
Yeah.
So. Well, good. Well, that covered sort of the startup strategy. To close this out, Ross, why don't we talk a little bit about trades and, maybe let's just talk about trading of draft picks for now, because I think we could probably devote a whole show to dynasty trades. But, as far as trading draft picks, what's sort of your mentality for that? I mean, are you one of those that hoards every pick you can get, or do you, like to flip them for something that's a certifiable asset?
I think trading is a necessary evil. I don't like trading myself, but you kind of have to do it to stay competitive with the people that are. Because in every league, it seems like there's guys doing a bunch of trades and then somehow getting a bunch of studs. So the way I've tried to combat that is stockpiling future picks, future firsts specifically. And I just try to play the dynasty stock market and then buy them in the summer when nobody's wanting them. And then that following year, when that first round comes around, try to sell them off for established players.
Right.
And it actually does work pretty well. I mean, some owners are pretty nuanced and know what you're doing, so you can't get away with it. But
after the first 2 or 3 years, you're always finishing in the first
they're like, wait, I don't want to give this guy my pick again.
Right.
So I mean, that's kind of how I attack it. I don't think it's a good idea to trade your first. Unless you're a contender and can get someone that will definitely help you that year. Then, in that case, if you're going to win it all, that is why you're playing. So if you can do that, then go for it, you know?
Yeah, and that I would put myself squarely in that latter category, meaning, look, I love rookie drafts. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're good times, but if I'm on, and sort of we'll switch gears a little bit to established dynasty teams, but yeah, I'm all about if I got a first and I'm one piece away, then I'm going for it. I mean, I've done that I think the last 3 years in one of my dynasty leagues. But look, I made the playoffs every year and it worked out.
Right.
So,
right.
I can't really fault it. And look, the point is, if you've got a good roster, not to say you won't get a good player without one, but if you can turn that into something, I would much rather turn that into something proven.
Yes.
That I know will help me, not just this year, but beyond, than chance it. And believe me, I know a bunch of people that love to go into a draft with 4 picks, and they're drafted every lottery ticket they can, and that's great, and that works for some people. But for me, I'm all about winning and winning this year. I just, especially though, and just as a side note, I think especially if you've got some financial investment into whatever leagues you're playing.
Right.
I don't understand the hey, I'm going to punt this year and hoard picks. Like, no, I want to win now.
Yeah.
So.
And that's another thing I would definitely stress. I never want to put myself in a position where I don't have a chance to win.
Right.
Like that is not something I would ever. I know some people, like you said, love it and it's an effective strategy for them. But for me personally, even if I do stockpile some future picks, I want to at least get some win now vets to at least make a run at it,
Right, right.
Give it a shot, because I'm putting money on the line every year, so why not?
Well, and yeah, if I'm starting a rookie at each position, then why am I even watching that week?
And one more thing with the draft picks, the bust rates for those rookie picks are high.
Right.
It's about 50-50 whether those guys are going to hit. So I don't know. That's why I tend to trade them before they actually become
You're absolutely
anything.
right. I mean, I can think of I think the only time, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've been doing this longer, but the only time since I've been doing Dynasty that there was a rookie pick that was like a sure hit was probably Luck.
Yeah, right. Look, he's the surest thing.
He went first, and you knew he was going to produce, and that was it. Every other player has been a huge question mark. I mean, even last year, I remember I got Odell Beckham late in the second round of a rookie draft, and this was 2 weeks before the season started. So, but at the same time, you get a guy like Marcus Lattimore in the first round for some drafts, and he never plays it down. So. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm all about win now, and I don't think Al Davis did a lot right in his heyday, but his just win baby I tend to stick to. So.
Yeah.
Well, good. No, that was a good first podcast, Russ. I think we got something here, and I think we could, if tonight's any indication, we could talk about Dynasty for hours. So we should have plenty of content for the listeners going forward. So
definitely.
Well, good. I think next week you and I will run through round 1 of a rookie mock draft for established Dynasty leagues. That should be fun. So until next time, he's Russell Clay. I'm Michael Moore, and we will see you next time.